Ladies and gentlemen and members of the Cult of Cornette, today we're proud to have on the Experience a man who has worn many hats, many names, and been many places in pro wrestling. We've teased a few. We're going to talk about some more, but he's never at a loss for words, and he is never reticent to say what's on his mind. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Sunshine State, well, I guess that's Florida, but the sunny state of Arizona, please welcome the Honky Tonk Man. Wayne, how are you today?
Very good, very good. You know, this is the Valley of the Sun, 85, 90 degrees today, always clear skies, and gosh, it's paradise, I guess, but that's in everyone's own mind.
How long you been out there now?
23 years this coming May.
Wow, because you're a Tennessee boy. If people didn't know that, they could probably tell by the accent. You and I guess would have been too Southern to team up together on WWF television. But you're from.
Well, according to your very close, dear personal friend Vince Russo, yes.
and Kevin Dunn would have a hand in that as well. We can't have any Southern accents on their Northern wrestling program.
Yeah, I don't think the accent has anything to do with anything. You know what I'm saying?
I bet Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky. I bet he didn't talk like he was from Brooklyn, but he managed to give the Gettysburg Address. If we had videotape or audio tape back then, we'd probably have that borne out. But I've heard a rumor that this is your last year on the road. Is that true?
Jimmy, I'm trying to, gosh, what would be the word? I'm trying to transition away from in the ring stuff as much as I can. Last year on the road, last year in wrestling, no, that's not going to happen. I'll go off the road and I'll be out of wrestling, you know, just like you when the sun sets somewhere and I go to the big battle royal and either down under or upstairs. But the reason I want to do that and get away from the actual in-ring stuff is simply because the young fellas, and you know this, and a lot of fans out there know this, they are not trained properly. They don't know what they're doing. They all think it's a television show, and that's how they learn, by watching TV. And I learned how to ride a bicycle one certain way, and it wasn't doing all these stupid stunts. And so for that reason, and trying to get to these towns, and the planes are packed nowadays, and it's really become a pain in the posterior. Let me just say pain in the ass.
Well, I've already dropped about 16 F-bombs on just the intro, so you can say it the way you want to say it. But I agree with you, because in a variety of ways, I agree with you about some of the talent. There's some guys out there that try to do things the right way, and there's still a few old-time trainers. But boy, it's like trying to find Amelia Earhart these days to find some of those guys.
Yeah, it's the equipment. Wrestling has always been a carnival sideshow. It always will be. And, they don't have the best facilities in the world, and you can't expect it when you're doing independent shows like I do. And it's real grassroots, but, sometimes it's the steps are breaking and falling in. I mean, go to Home Depot and get a couple of 2x4s and make some steps or something, or have somebody hold my hand to help me get up in the ring.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same way with my rubber band knees. If I have to get up and stand in the ring to pose for pictures, people start bouncing, and I'm afraid that my shit's going to snap in half. But I'm even more like you are on the traveling aspect these days, and I don't even fly anymore. But just being out on the road and checking into a hotel and checking out of the hotel, and it gets to be, I long for my couch in front of my 72-inch screen, and I'm happier there with a Sprite in my hand and a remote control in the other hand. I used to say pizza, but I've tried to go on a diet and be healthier.
And you've done very well with it. When I saw you not so long ago at the Lexington Comic Con, and you've done fabulous with your dieting and everything, But it's a lot of genetics. I have trouble with mine. I've always had this beer belly, and I believe that the best heels always need beer belly and buggy whip arms. But that's one man's opinion.
Well, it used to be you could get heat just with your appearance, and now everybody comes out of a cookie cutter, and they've been trained. People have been trained. Well, you got to look a certain way to be a wrestler, and I watch the UFC now to get my wrestling fix, and I see a lot of different body types. They all look like somewhat professional athletes, but there's a lot of different body types. And I figured maybe you're the Roy Nelson of pro wrestling, because he don't look like he should be a professional fighter, but he is, and he's had success.
Yeah, and you know, there again, I don't look that good in a speedo, and I'm not all tattooed up like I've been in a jailhouse or anything. So,
Hey, a lot of times, you know, it would have been great if 30 years ago, if the guys had as many tattoos as they do now, because when you had them in a chin lock ready to build the heat, you'd have had something to read.
yeah, and you know, these fellas, if they wanted to know about tattoos, they should take lessons from Don Fargo. I saw him not long ago, and all his are, you know, he's stuff done. They're homemade. And they always look the best.
Oh, Don Fargo, there's a guy. When I actually hosted the Hall of Heroes banquet in Charlotte at the annual Fan Fest and reunion a couple of years ago, they honored the Fargo brothers and inducted them. And I said, Don Fargo's in the audience tonight. I said, you know, people say that after nuclear war, the only things left will be cockroaches and Keith Richards. Well, Don Fargo, I promise you, would still be here, and he would be eating the cockroaches, and Keith Richards would be Mrs. Fargo. He is the toughest guy. He's 80-something years old. He's the only guy I can think of in our business that wrestled on network television for the Dumont Network in the mid-'50s and was on ESPN in 1991, still wrestling. He's amazing.
Yes, he really is, and I was able to visit with him a little bit in Panama City, Pensacola area not so long ago, and came by to see us, and just still a great guy. And I took a lot. You know, you mentioned earlier that I've worn a lot of hats and done a lot of things, and I patterned a tremendous amount of my ring, the way I walked in the ring, the way I stood in the ring, the way that I would try to get heat when I was a bad guy in the heel, and I would study Don Fargo because I thought he was the best in the world. I really did, simply because I know that Jarrett and Lawler, sometimes they would put him out on the very first match of the night for no reason, put him in with either myself or Coco Beware or some undercard kid that was just learning, and Fargo could go out in the first 5 minutes. He would have people fighting in the stands, trying to get in the ring to fight him. And I thought, this guy's a tremendous performer, and to be treated that way later in his career did no justice to him at all. And but I would watch him and study, and the things he did were just so fabulous. I mean, he was fantastic at making. I was standing at the back in the Memphis Coliseum once, myself, Dennis Condrey, David Schultz, and Don Carson. Now that's a cast of characters standing there.
I was about to say.
And so Fargo was standing with us, and some guy walked up to the fence and said, "Hey, Fargo, you're not so tough." And he punched Fargo in the chest with his finger. And so Fargo says, "Oh, yeah?" He says, "Yeah." Now, out of all those people, he picked on Fargo.
Oh.
Fargo one-punched this guy. And everybody in the building turned to see what was going on when the guy fell back.
Hey, Fargo, actually, he came to Louisville one night. I was like 15, 16 years old. I was in the back. You remember in the back where Pat Malone used to sit and watch the locker room door. And at the time, they had an usher from Louisville Gardens that was there just to open the door for the wrestlers. That's all he was there for. And Don Fargo walked up, and it was his first time back in the territory. And this kid was like 17, 18 years old, the usher, and he wouldn't let him in because he didn't know he was one of the wrestlers. And Fargo, you know, he took it well. He could have, you know, picked his teeth with the guy and eaten his mother. But he just said, "Look, kid, I'm carrying a bag, and look at my face." And so the guy opened the door and asked Pat Malone and I was standing there, "Is this guy a wrestler?" "Yeah, I'll let him in." And Fargo comes in. He had bladed his cheek because he was working brass knuckles matches. He had a giant gig on his cheek. He had this puffed up eye from where he'd done a hard way in the Knoxville territory or somewhere like the week before. He had all these scars. His head looked like a basketball. And he just said, "Pally, you can look at this face and not tell I'm a wrestler."
And there's one other thing that I did take from him. The first time I met him, I walked in the locker room, and, you know, we were taught to go around and tell everyone, "Hello, my name's so-and-so. It's nice to meet you." I walk over. I said, "Hi, my name's Wayne Ferris. It's nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you." And as soon as I said, "I've heard a lot about you," he said, "It's all true." And so I've used that hundreds of thousands of times with people when they say, "Oh, I've heard a lot about you. I know a lot about your career." I said, "It's all true."
Yeah, yeah. Well, was it the time that Don used the blank gun to shoot Jackie in front of the hitchhiker and then made the hitchhiker dispose of the body, or was the time that
Oh
uh,
gosh, yes.
that Jackie asked Don if he had any chewing gum, and Don said sure, and he pulled the foreskin of his dick back and had some
Yep.
chewing gum there, and Jackie took it and put it in his mouth to freak out the rookie in the room,
Yep.
or just any of those things.
And any of
But
that stuff, and it's when you look back on it, it was so fun. I mean, it was crazy fun, but it was really fun. And some trivia for the fans out there, real quick, because you mentioned Louisville, and I don't want to forget this because it was on my mind this morning. My first publicity picture ever made in wrestling, Jim Cornette made it in the back of the Louisville Gardens.
that's true.
That is true.
And as a
Yes.
matter of fact, I made your first publicity picture for a couple of different gimmicks.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And you know, someone gave me the one not so long ago. They had it down in Mobile, Alabama. Someone had it and gave me. I said, "That's the first PR picture I ever had made." I said, "You know who made this? Jim Cornette." And I told the story, and I have a copy of that one. But the others, some of them, I don't want to remember.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about, and I'm not going to reveal. I'm going to do a book. I'm going to put that picture in my book of photography and say, guess who this is? Because nobody would be able to tell. And one more Don Fargo story real quick, and we'll get to the offshoot of that, which is hardcore wrestling. But also for the folks out there who don't know, and Alice, this may appeal to you, I don't know. But Don Fargo was one of the first guys actually in the business, or probably in the world, that had a pierced dick. And there was a hole in the foreskin, and even when he didn't have a ring in it, the rookies would come into the locker room and they wouldn't know anything about Don Fargo, and they would look over in the corner and he'd have a 10-penny nail and a claw hammer, and he'd be nailing his dick to the bench.
Oh my God. I mean,
Well,
see, this is the thing I don't understand, men. What a strange thing. I mean, obviously women don't have dicks, but I was going to say a woman wouldn't do something like that. But I mean, maybe she's got a hole in her nipple. She'll nail her nipple to something. I don't want to know that woman.
Wait a minute. You don't know the girls that hang around the wrestling business. Hey, take it easy now.
I was about to say it would have been a real education for Alice if she was around back in the 70s and 80s. But speaking of which, I know everybody wants to hear some WWF stories. We're going to tell some, but we teased it earlier in the program. When you were Wayne Ferris in the Memphis territory, your partner was Larry Latham, who later became Moondog Spot and unfortunately has passed away, but everybody knew him as Moondog Spot around the world, but he was a lot smaller and a lot more agile. And the team of Ferris and Latham, managed by my great friend and partner, Sergeant Danny Davis, was the top tag team, top heel team in the Memphis territory for a couple of years, as well as working for Nick Goulas in Nashville. You may not want to talk about that, and everywhere you guys went. But you guys were responsible for the birth of hardcore wrestling, and it goes back to a night in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1979. Robert Fuller had been the Memphis booker, and he'd brought all of his Knoxville talent in, and houses were plummeting, and it got down to about $12,000 one night in the Mid-South Coliseum. And Jerry made the remark to Robert, it can't get much worse. And Robert's reply, according to the story I heard, was, oh, yes, it can. And he got canned that night. And the next weekend, Jarrett, with really a skeleton crew, Jerry Lawler, Bill Dundee, you and Larry, and some underneath talent, had to rebuild the territory instantly from scratch and shot the famous Tupelo concession stand brawl. And I encourage everybody to look for this on YouTube, because this was the most memorable and my favorite angle from the time that I was a wrestling fan of anything I ever saw. Lance Russell, who was the old master, made it, sold it perfectly. And basically in Tupelo, Mississippi, you guys not only fucked Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee out of the Southern Tag Team Championship, but in a quadruple juice brawl, you went into the concession stand and broke everything except the popcorn machine, which was the one thing everybody was told to stay away from what I understand. Mustard jugs, Lance Russell screaming mustard everywhere. You guys not only laid it in, and Bill Dundee his working punches were bad enough, but when he was shooting, it was brutal. You guys managed to turn the territory around in like a 2-week period and tripled business in every town in the territory. And the reason why that was the birth of hardcore wrestling, before we have your firsthand account of it, is because It worked so good for business that they tried to do it every year from that point on. And 2 years later, they did it with a Japanese kid that had just got here named Atsushi Onita, Mr. Onita, who what he took away from Tennessee wrestling when he went back to Japan was these crazy guys that fight in the concession stand and bleed all over the place and hit each other over the head with things. And he created the hardcore promotion in Japan that then gave birth to hardcore wrestling. But the thing they left out was the fact that it actually drew money the first time you did it, but then you did it 15 times after that, and the law of diminishing returns kicked in. What did you think when Jerry Jarrett came to you guys and said, I want you to tear the building down?
You know, it was one of those things where, now we were just coming in, and that was one of the, I'm thinking it was like our first night in, and came up, Larry and I did from Tampa. We had been, we didn't really give a notice. We hauled ass out of there because Jerry Briscoe and those guys were up to, they weren't using us. I mean, we were underneath tag team. It had just gotten thrown together, and we stayed there 6 weeks. And Larry knew Ole Anderson, so he called Ole and says, well, you know, we don't have a place to work. Can you use us? He said, I don't need anyone, but Jerry Jarrett needs someone right now. And so we called Jerry Jarrett from down by the Florida-Georgia line, and Jerry says, gosh, yes, I need somebody right away. Robert Fuller's taken all the talent, and they've gone. And Jerry, he said, can you guys be in Tupelo on Friday night? And we hauled ass to Memphis and up into Tupelo. And when Jerry came in the locker room, he sat there in front of all of us, and he said, fellas, we got a real problem. We got to do something. And he said, I've come up with something. I don't know if it'll work or not. And here's what we'll do. And he said, you guys are out there with Lawler and Dundee, a 2 out of 3 tag match. And on the third fall, you guys win the belts and just tear the building down. And of course, we were really pretty green guys, Larry and I. We had been around, but we had only been a tag team for, I don't know, 8 weeks down in the Tampa territory.
You'd started in Memphis a few years beforehand, and you kind of knew the style, but you'd never been featured in the territory. You were kind of a sidekick to the thing between Lawler and Valiant, and you'd
Right.
been worked underneath, but you'd never had that main event spot.
Right, absolutely. So that was going to be something new and different for us, and of course, getting the tag team belts, us being young green guys, we were like, oh, wow, man, Southern Tag Team Champions. Oh, God, yeah, we love it, Jerry, of course. But then the whole scenario was that they'll keep the tape going, and whatever happens, happens, and there was nothing. People can talk about things being scripted in our business all they want to, but whoever believes that is absolutely full of shit, because there's some things that cannot and will not ever be scripted, and that was one of them. And so when the match was over, we get the belts. Of course, Lawler and Dundee, being the perfect baby faces, they were the first ones to throw punches. They started beating the hell out of us. and we were taking the brunt of it.
Now it helped that you had fucked them in just a dastardly heel.
Well, now, I mean, that comes that comes with winning the belts, you know. It's like that old game we used to have at the pool hall. It's called Fuck Your Buddy, you know. So sure, we gave them a good little twist there to the end of this thing, and get the belts. But going into that concession stand and doing that, if the fans watch it and watch it really, really closely, they'll see that Lawler, like you said, Dundee with those working punches, my ass. But Lawler, they did not sell our stuff very well at all. Now, the only time there was any selling going on is when one of them would maybe slip on the mustard. But you know, we did that thing. It created such havoc. They showed it back the following Saturday morning on Memphis TV. That night in Jonesboro, Arkansas, they turned people away. We were off on Sunday and Monday night. Memphis was sold out. And by then, the word had spread around. Even this was before the internet. Word had spread around to the rest of the towns across the South. And we get to Louisville, and it's sold out and before they even saw the angle. So this thing was really, really big. And I've got to say also. It created hardcore. It really did.
I got to say also, Lance Russell was perfect as the announcer because The way that it was is Lance would take the one camera set up for what they called the Jackson show, which since Jackson, Tennessee and Tupelo, Mississippi both got Memphis television, they had to have a second show for those local stations. And so fans would see Lance at various places around Memphis at the various events where they'd have one camera and Lance would do the announcing, and they would show that back on the Memphis or the Tupelo and the Jackson stations. And so it wasn't unusual to see him there with the camera, but then he signed off as you guys fought out of the ring and you guys took off and Lawler and Dundee were chasing you. He signed off for the program and the camera goes to black. And this is what they showed on Memphis TV with no editing. The camera goes black and then you hear some commotion and you hear Lance with the audio still up saying, "Randy, there's a hell of a fight going down here. Can you bring the camera?" And they're up in the crow's nest at that old shitty building in Tupelo. And you see the camera come back up and it's moving. It's being handheld now. And Lance is going down those rickety old stairs and he grabs a light stand. So he's literally got a light stand in his hand to shine the light in the concession stand. And when the camera gets around the corner, there you guys are covered in blood and you are beating the piss out of each other with every piece of furniture and every implement in that concession stand, and glass jars are being broken everywhere. And like you said, they're slipping in ketchup and mustard and potatoes are being thrown. And I mean the wrestling kind, not the kind that you grow in the ground.
And you know, when you said go to black, I had forgotten that, but that's true. And because there was a couple of minutes, 45 seconds, maybe a minute before Lance and those guys were able to get the cameras and get them turned back on. They missed about a minute and a half of the real action that started it all, and the fans only see what had started. But before, the concession stand was full of the workers working. They still had the hot dogs in the hot dog pans, but by the time the camera came on, it had turned into a complete tornado.
Yeah, and it went for minutes and minutes, and finally, and I think they even tore the wall down because it wasn't a sturdy building to begin with, but you tore the wall down leading from the concession stand to the locker rooms, and I've heard at one point Eddie Marlin may have been in the shower, and then also when Jarrett came in to try to stop it and got it broken up, and then didn't y'all strip his clothes off on that one, or am I thinking about another one? You got him down too?
We got Jarrett in Louisville where we stripped his clothes off.
That's right, and because I've got the tape of that also. They shot that.
That became real deadly there now. And that Louisville crowd was they were rough fans and they loved this Jarrett to death. And when we started on him and we had Dundee tied up or handcuffed or something, Danny Davis had handcuffed him and he couldn't get loose. And Jarrett, when we were working him over, stripped him down to his underwear, and holy cow, the fans hit the ring.
I remember. Yeah, the people started hitting the ring because that's when, within a week, Jerry had seen what was going on with this and had added Danny Davis as y'all's manager. I think probably on the outside with that helmet and his metal canteen to help keep the fans out of the ring.
Let me put a little
also.
Let me add something. There was a young fellow there that night. You mentioned the cast of characters. Tommy Gilbert was there, and there was a young fellow just starting. I don't think he'd even had a match, or he might have just been just a few matches. A young fellow named Eddie Gilbert.
Yep.
Eddie was there to see this and witness this carnage in Tupelo. And many years later, Eddie took the concept, the idea, like you said about Onita, and Eddie got together with those fellows over in Philadelphia. And the next thing they created was the ECW. Yep. And that's so the list goes on and on.
But then the important lesson was learned by, and folks, we could tell more stories about that era, and we're downplaying the carnage of it, and the fact that, like I said, business did triple in the space of a couple of weeks in this territory. I saw it because people, and they showed that angle every week on TV for about 3 weeks, just unedited, just the same as it was. People couldn't get enough of it. They kept writing in saying, "Please, can you see it again? Or show it again." This was before VCRs, but nobody had ever seen anything like it. And there were several lessons learned from it. When you see something for the first time, it will always draw money. When you see something for the 5th time and the 10th time and the 20th time, then you're just fooling your fucking self, because it ain't going to draw any money, because it's the thing that could never happen in a million years happened once. That draws money. When the thing that could never happen in a million years happens twice the same year, second time don't draw money.
No, it didn't. And you know, Jimmy, we also did it again with Robert Gibson and
it was Ricky and
brother.
Robert. Yeah, Ricky and Robert Gibson. Yeah,
Ricky and Robert, and we did that again. And that time was the handcuffs again, where Danny had handcuffed one of the Gibsons, and someone went out to their truck, and we did it in Tupelo. Went out to their truck, grabbed a set of big snips, and came back in and cut. I think it was Ricky. We had Ricky tied up, had him handcuffed. They cut the handcuffs off of him. And,
bolt cutters.
Yeah, they came out with bolt cutters and cut the handcuffs. And here he is. He's beating the crap out of us. We're thinking, where did he come from? He's still got the handcuff hanging on his arm.
And well, that led to the Memphis TV that y'all did, where Ricky was in the hotel room. And folks, if I'm lying, I'm flying, and my feet have not left the ground. This really happened. Memphis TV was live from the Channel 5 studios, and Ricky Gibson was in his hotel room with a couple of rats to be there to witness it, selling the beating that the Blonde Bombers and Danny Davis had given him. And Robert was all by himself at TV, and y'all attacked Robert and beat the shit out of him. And Ricky saw it on TV in front of the fans that were with him, jumped in his car, drove down to Channel 5, and came out and hit the ring on y'all's match with a tire iron.
Not only did he hit the ring, he hit Danny Davis over the head with that tire iron. And Danny had the helmet on, the war helmet, and it put Danny's eyes crossed. He dropped to his knees.
It didn't put a dent in it. It punctured a hole in it. This was a regular Army helmet from an Army surplus store, and Danny showed me that helmet. He punctured the Army helmet with the tire iron. He hit him so hard, and Danny, like I said, dropped to his knees. But that was, people believed that shit because the guys doing it believed it. But then, you know, once again, it was heat, and it was business, and it was selling tickets. But then, unfortunately, hardcore wrestling, the concept got into the hands of people who didn't understand how to use it on a limited basis and how to use it to draw money and then pull back before you go too far, and you hot shot. And then they started hurting each other for real on a daily basis with everything. And then but at the same time, the people stopped believing it because they'd seen people blown up and set on fire. And as Dutch Mantell then said so famously, I liked the business a lot better when the marks were out front. All of a sudden, it went from we're doing this to draw money, and then we're going to scale it back and work, to we're hurting ourselves for real on a regular basis, and nobody believes it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Tupelo thing, no one was seriously physically injured to any capacity at all. I mean, there were some bumps and bruises, but that comes normal with doing something where you're slipping and sliding, and it was uncontrollable with that part of it. But we did have I call it controlled violence in some aspects, a lot more than what you're talking about with the way the hardcore evolved after that became sickening. I mean, it became people falling on light bulbs, and they had electrical fuse boxes and things. It got to the point where you got to be kidding me. And even WWF tried to duplicate the concession stand thing, I think, once up in upstairs in one of the buildings in the kitchen area. It didn't play. You're
you can
right.
always tell when it's too pretty, when it's lit too good, when it's set. Obviously, the stage has been set and everything's there. You know, this was organic. This came from something nobody knew was going to happen, and it looked legitimate. And also, here's a question: When did thumbtacks allow you to win a fucking street fight? When did falling in thumbtacks become something that would incapacitate somebody where they'd lose a street fight? I've always wondered about that.
Jim, are you saying you don't carry thumbtacks everywhere you go?
I used to carry them to defend myself. But when you fall in thumbtacks, you immediately jump up and get even more pissed at the guy you're fighting, right? That's to me.
I never understood that part of it, or baseball bats wrapped with barbed wire, and I mean, we we did hardcore that was believable, that looked great, and it looked good to the people, and the people bought into what we were doing, as opposed to turning their heads going, that can't be real. See, now we had another little twist too now, Jimmy, that went into this, and of course with Lawler and myself being first cousins, our mothers were sisters, then it became, and Jerry Jarrett always loved this. He loved this personal angle, and he loved to pull out that personal touch and all these things that he did, and that became, that became another side angle that carried on with this, that we were two cousins that hated each other, and which in fact we do. So,
so it was easy to carry off. It was believable.
Yes, it was extremely believable. It was because it was true, and Jerry Jarrett played upon that. Jerry Jarrett was a master. He is masterful at this, and I don't want to get into that TNA nonsense, but whatever happened with him and Jeff and all that business there, Jerry Jarrett was the only person that probably could have ever made that place work, even though they thought, well, he's behind the times, he's not with it. Listen, some old stories never go away. Old angles can always be rehashed with the new talent in a new way. Look, when Vince was almost thinking he might be going away to the federal penitentiary, he called Jerry Jarrett to come up and, hey, take over this company for me if I go away. So that's pretty trustworthy of someone.
Yeah, and that's true. In 1992, that's why Jerry Jarrett got involved in the WWF, because Vince knew that there was nobody else capable of keeping a company together than somebody like Jerry Jarrett that had that experience. And the one thing about Jerry Jarrett's booking and his whole philosophy was you can do anything that you want to do, and it won't matter, it won't draw if nobody believes in it. And Jerry was a master at, like you said, those subtle touches that would make people believe, well, there's something to this, because they are cousins, and they always have disliked each other, and they've always have knocked each other. You'd knock Lawler if you were at the convenience store in front of 3 fans, but 3 would tell 6 and 6 would tell 12, and there you go. And
he was a master at doing that. The first time that and I was still just a fan. I was still very markish to all this stuff, and which we're all marks. If we weren't marks, we wouldn't love this business, and I'll always be a mark to it. But he put that twist in with Lawler and Dundee when Dundee's wife got her head shaved. This was turned into a personal issue that Jerry Jarrett twisted around and made it sell out business.
Exactly. It was just the little small things that, to where there were no holes in the logic. I mean, wrestling is an illogical business. If you throw somebody into the ropes, they're not really coming back, but you can make it look like it's legitimate. And if you put in those little subtle touches to where when people are sitting there, and I drive my wife crazy because I will watch movies and television programs, and it'll come to a point where there's that hole in the logic where the main character does something that they wouldn't do in that instance. And I say, why would he do that? And now I'm out of it, right? Now I'm like, oh, shit. And would you just shut up and watch it? But people do that in their heads. They say, well, he wouldn't do that. And once you've lost them like that, then you've lost that ability for them to make the emotional investment that requires them to buy a ticket or to buy a pay-per-view or to spend some money or to go out of their way to see what's going to happen in the next episode of the story. And I'll tell you another tag team partner you had in Tennessee, and another riot that you started that I was in the middle of, was the famous Louisville Gardens brawl. You were partners with Kevin Sullivan and Danny Davis by that point, and his partner Ken Wayne were the Nightmares. No, as a matter of fact, Ken wasn't a nightmare yet. It was David Oswald, the first partner, and it was Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee and Dutch Mantell and the Dream Machine, I believe, were the Babyfaces. Yes. And it was the most classic textbook example. I used to show this tape to the guys in wrestling school. This is how you do a staggered run-in. You and Kevin Sullivan were beating the shit out of Bill Dundee and the Dream Machine, and Jimmy Hart was your manager, and the disqualification happened, and you were on the Babyfaces, and then here came Dutch Mantell, and he made a big comeback, and then here came one of the Nightmares, and he shut it down, and then here came Jerry Lawler, and he made a big comeback, and here came the other Nightmare, and he shut it down. And all 9 of you spilled out of the ring. Actually, it was a 2-ring battle royal night, so there were 2 rings there. So there was 9 guys fighting in 2 rings. Then you spilled out of that and went up to the back area of Louisville Gardens, where they had blocked off one section of the bleachers. And Lawler, of course, took his patented ass over tea kettle bump backwards down 30 flights of bleachers. And you guys were using Jimmy Hart's cane to beat everybody bloody and had Dream Machine's mask torn open. And the Louisville Gardens cops, this was 1981. They were still wearing riot helmets for the wrestling matches in 81 in Louisville. And they were carrying, it's on the video, they were carrying fans out as quick as they'd try to hop on you guys. They'd grab them and full Nelson them, and another cop would grab the feet, and they'd carry the guys out. And you did 8-man tags all around the territory for the next 3 or 4 weeks and did nothing but fucking business.
Yeah.
Just off of that tape being shown everywhere, because once again, people thought they were going to see a riot, and because they thought they were going to see a riot, it caused a riot.
Yes, and you know, I've got to hand it to NASCAR. I'm not a big NASCAR fan, but I know there's a lot of fans out there listening that are. NASCAR has been able to keep showing the carnage and the wreckage and all this stuff every Sunday, whereas pro football, basketball, baseball, they'll cut away.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. The fans would come because they wanted to see a riot. They thought it was going to be a riot. There were people that went there just to say, if there's going to be a fight, I want to get in it. You know, and real quick, Jimmy, Lawler and Dundee had not worked, and you mentioned Nick Gulas earlier. Lawler and Dundee had not worked for Nick Gulas in several years since they had split away from Nick. And the Tupelo concession stand thing, Nick heard about it, called Jarrett, and begged and pleaded, could he have this thing and put it in Nashville and Chattanooga? And we did, and did sell-out business over there after it had kind of simmered down a bit over in the Memphis end. Yes, we took that thing to Nashville and Chattanooga and turned away people there.
That's right. I remember that, and it wasn't long after that Nick finally said, I'm going to give up, and Jarrett bought the whole thing out from him, and that made Nashville a regular stop. And
yeah.
And
then Larry and I were farmed out to Nashville after that.
Yeah, I remember that too, and that had to be, you were working, you may have been one of the last tag teams to put the incredible tag team of the Jet Set, Bobby Eaton and George Gulas, over.
Probably so, and we did. We put them over in the basketball games too on Sunday afternoons before the wrestling show. So, but you know what all came out of that was Dutch was there, and Dutch Mantell, and Dutch needed a partner to go to Puerto Rico because Dennis Condrey had fudged out and decided not to go. So Dutch was in a desperate last minute and asked me would I go, and Larry and I, we busted up the team. And Larry never forgave me, but you know how the business is. A man has to do what a man has to do.
Well, and it was good for you because once you went to Puerto Rico, was it in Puerto Rico or was it when you went out to Calgary that you started Honky Tonk Wayne Ferris that later evolved into the Honky Tonk Man?
I came back from Puerto Rico and worked briefly for Jarrett again, and then I went down to Pensacola and Mobile for Robert and Ron Fuller, and that's where the Honky Tonk Man things started to evolve, and that's how I started to put the character together. And I was going to say, we were talking about personal issues. I was then carried all that knowledge that I had picked up from those years around Jarrett and doing that stuff on the personal side. When my best piece of business was with Macho Man Randy Savage in the WWE, and we made it the same way. It became a personal thing, and it was personal to the fans. The fans wanted Macho Man to destroy me every night of the week, 300 days a year. And when he couldn't do it, it was almost riots every night, even in WWE.
Well, you were a heel like the Midnight Express. Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey were heels in that everybody said, well, they're not that big. I could probably whip them, but I hate them so bad. I want to pay to see the Babyfaces beat them to death. And it didn't even matter whether you'd been beat up the week before. They wanted to see you beat up again.
Yeah, I did an interview yesterday for a newspaper. I'm going up to Marietta, Ohio on Friday. And and anyway, I did an interview, and the fellow says, I've been a long-time wrestling fan. I was watching when I was like 8 years old. And I said, yeah, I know. And I guarantee you that when you were sitting there on Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon, and I came on TV and said, I'll be walking the streets looking for a fight, and I can't find one. And you were 8 years old, your fist doubled up and said, Mom, Dad, if he comes down our street, I can whip this guy's ass.
Well, and as I mentioned Calgary, because weren't you in Calgary right before you went to the WWF? Wasn't that really where the honky tonk thing really got all together?
It's where it was. I had perfected it. I want to say I had started it in Pensacola, Mobile. Then I took it up to Calgary and fine tuned it there. And a lot of the WWE wrestlers, they couldn't understand my first time in Toronto that the fans were rioting, throwing shit at me, and I'm on the first match out there with S.D. Jones, and the fans want me dead. I said, well, I had been on the nationwide Canadian TV, which is very much like Turner Broadcasting back then. I had been on that TV for over a year all across Canada, so the fans in Canada knew of the Honky Tonk Man. They had seen this character. They hated this character. So then I'm out there as a babyface going against Iron Mike Sharp, and every time Iron Mike Sharp would hit me as hard as he could and almost try to kill me, the fans were cheering. So the heels were going back and telling the office, this guy's killing our heat. We can't do anything out here.
That's right. You just brought it up because you'd been in Calgary, and that was a perfect old-time wrestling territory for you to really get heat and really for a heel to really prosper. Yeah. But when Vince brought you in, for some reason, I guess at the time he thought you were going to be a babyface because people liked Elvis. They thought he didn't get it. They made you a babyface at first. Yes,
and it was horrible. And I told him in the very beginning when we did our interview, and he flew me down there to interview me and look at some tape on me. And I said, I have designed this character to be a bad guy. It's designed that way. It's designed to make people hate me. And he says, no, I can see little kids in jumpsuits. And Vince was thinking of merchandise. Vince was all he could see was, I can see little Elvis wigs out there. And I said, I can too, but they're going to be throwing them at me. I said, he says, no, let's give it a try. Let's at least try it. I said, Vince, it's not going to work. I can't make it work. And I couldn't. Now I can, Jimmy. Now I go out here on the independent shows. They love the Honky Tonk Man because it's nostalgia, and they get to see someone that they can relive their youth for 5 or 10 minutes when I'm in the ring.
Exactly. I'll always say that they're glad to see that we're still breathing. Remember that fun time when they liked wrestling, when wrestling was good and they liked it, and he's still here. That's you grow into that elder statesman role, but at the time you were completely disreputable. There was nothing likable about you, and there shouldn't have been because there was a perfect heel gimmick.
I take pride in the fact that when everyone says how much they hated me and how much they hated the gimmick and how horrible I was in the ring and I wasn't technical like Bret Hart and I wasn't this and I wasn't that, then fine. Thank you very much. I obviously did a damn good job.
That's why you had to cheat. Because you weren't as good as the babyface. That's why you had to cheat.
People don't understand. I won one match there, and I cheated to beat Ricky Steamboat. And they say, well, Ricky Steamboat was a great champion. He was a champion for 6 weeks. He had the belt. For Christ's sakes, man. And like I said, the best piece of work was with Randy. Even though we did not get along in any way on a personal level. It was strictly business all the way through. I didn't see Randy outside the locker room, outside the building, but that was good for business. And he walked to the beat of a different drum, and I did too, and it all worked.
I think this might be a good time. Am I a robot, or do I sound good?
No, you sound great. You sound great.
Outstanding. I wanted to read you guys 2 tweets that came from Jim Ross, and because they're sort of germane to what you guys are talking about. And what he said was, I'd estimate that half of today's TV wrestling heels aren't equipped, i.e. guts and toughness, to be great villains. Most would rather be cool. TV wrestling villains must lie, selectively be a coward, be a bully when they can, gain unfair advantages, bitch, moan, and disrespect fans. And I think this kind of fits into what you guys are talking about now. Be curious to know what you both think of that.
Oh, that's absolutely 100% true. There's no way to be in between, and I think the death of bad guys and heels and good bad guys was the Attitude Era where, we're all going to go out and have 6-man, 8-man matches, and we don't know who to cheer for, and we don't know who to boo for, and there has to be a separation, or you just can't sell tickets.
Well, Vince Russo one time said, "Oh, there are no baby faces and heels. It's shades of gray." And Dutch Mantell hit him with this. He said, "Well, he said, actually, there are people who are just all good and people who are all bad. They wrote a book about it. You ought to read it sometime." And Russo said, "What's that?" He says, "It's called the Bible." it, people, they don't understand now because the guys that get into business these days get in the business taking it as a television program that they have been watching for entertainment, and everybody plays a character. We didn't play characters, we were characters. Once you figured out who the best personality for you was to portray to the audience and to sell tickets with, that became you. You were that. Would you agree with that, Wayne, as much as as far as it goes?
Absolutely. You can't. I don't walk the streets in a jumpsuit dressed like Elvis, and that's a character. That's somebody I played. But is that character very far away from me? Absolutely not. And I equate it to this a lot of times, and I've been on record to say it. And I'm not going to pick on him because he's not here to defend himself right now. Lex Luger, Lex now is a great guy. Years ago he wasn't, but he was never able to portray himself on TV to make people believe in him. And if you can't, and I'm just using him for an example, but there's other people the same way. If you cannot make people believe that you are that character, then your character will not work.
Well, I used to say to the kids in training in wrestling school, I used to say when they would do a promo, you didn't sound like you were trying to convince the fans. You sounded like you were trying to convince yourself that what you were saying was true.
Yeah,
if you don't believe in you, if you don't believe in it, nobody else will.
Yeah, if you can't look straight into that camera and sell yourself for that minute and a half that you have, or that 2 minutes, then you're in the wrong business. And good examples of people that can do it. Hulk Hogan. Hulk is Hulk Hogan, brother. I mean, he can look in that camera as soon as the camera comes on, and he can sell Hulk Hogan. The Macho Man could sell, ooh, yeah, Macho Man, yeah, space is the police, yeah. He could do that. Lawler, believe me, Jerry Lawler believes he's the king. It's true.
You're right. You're exactly right.
But you have to believe in that character to make it come across. You can't just go out there and I couldn't be Jim Cornette tomorrow. They couldn't say, "Here, take the tennis racket, go out there and act like Jim Cornette." Well, I can't do it. That's not me. That's not what I do.
And I couldn't swivel my hips and sing, "He's a honky tonk man, he's cool, he's cocky, he's bad." I just couldn't do it because that's not me.
Right, and I don't know, you might have a different take on it. You were around all that Attitude Era and everything when there was all these shades of gray, and they still are now. They've gone so corporate, they don't want guys to have people booing them, and they don't want riots in the building. Hell, man, if you're going to sell tickets, you got to have people mad at somebody.
Well, and I hated it too because I saw where it was going. And people don't understand this unless they've studied wrestling history. Every period of hot shotting is followed by an equally long, if not longer, period of drought. And what the Attitude Era was, even though it was very successful, was a long period of hot shotting, and that's why everything dropped. Because once, and I've talked to Steve about this. Once that Steve Austin hugged Vince McMahon, and the people lost the one guy that they believed in. Say what you want about wrestling, but that guy's real. Once that they didn't want to see that, and once they lost that believability in Steve Austin, then the other things started unraveling. Then WCW went out of business, and there was no competition. And then, the early 2000s was a drought period for our business, and unfortunately, they'd lost the ability to make people believe that things were real because the Attitude Era was all about telling them it was all scripted and they're going against the script. So now you've got a bunch of baby faces that the people know are saying the things that they're told to say, and you got a bunch of heels that the people know are doing things to make them mad that they are told to do, and nobody believed any of it, and there you go.
Yeah, and then they take guys and they think it can be a farm system and a minor league, and they have these boys and girls now that, are they really living their dream? I was back there one time, and some of those divas, they didn't know who the heck I was. It's like, who is this guy? They're
living the dream they've had since last month.
I have said this. I've been on record saying it hundreds of times. Jimmy Cornette is a historian to this business. He knows the wrestling history, And if you don't know something about wrestling history, you will never make it because you can't just be a fan of a TV show called Raw.
Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat its mistakes.